A pleasant day to each and everyone, most especially to our beloved teacher, Ma'am Marlene. Good day, ma'am. So for today's presentation, our group was tasked to present an analysis of former President Corazon C. Aquino's speech to the United States Congress on September 18, 1986. But first, I will introduce the group 2. We have Alfahar Ali, Nurhalim Bakil, Alfahad Baluan, Annalyn Coronel, and I myself, Nashima Jainal. So without further ado, let's start with the introduction.
Maria Corazon Aquino, or also known as Cory Aquino, was born on January 25, 1933 in Tarlac, Philippines. Her husband, Benigno Aquino Sr., had been an opponent of Ferdinand Marcos and was assassinated upon returning from exile. When Marcos unexpectedly called for elections in 1986, Corazon Aquino became the unified opposition's presidential candidate. She took up office after Marcos fled the country and go to Hawaii, and served as president with mixed results until 1992. She is a Philippine political leader who served as the first female president of the Philippines from 1986 to 1992. Restoring democratic rule in the country after the long dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. She died at the age of 76 in August 1, 2009.
When former President Corazon Aquino spoke before a joint session of the United States Congress in September of 1986, the dust was only beginning to settle. It was her first visit to America since the dictator Ferdinand Marcos had been deposed of February in the same year, and the Philippines was reckoning with everything his administration has inflicted. That included $26 billion in total for foreign debt and a communist insurgency that grew throughout the Marcos era. From 500 armed guerrillas to 16,000, we were just at the start of a long road to recovery. The task had fallen on my shoulder to continue offering the democratic alternative to our people. That's President Corazon Aquino took the responsibility in taking care and fighting for the sake of freedom of the whole country. President Aquino and President Reagan discussed her strenuous efforts to bolster the democratic institutions of her country and to ensure its security and strengthen its economy, and he assured her that all America wants the Philippines' democracy to succeed and prosper, and that we'll do what we can to help. It is stated also that Filipinos face a communist insurgency that feeds on economic deterioration, even though they carry a great share of the free world defenses in the Pacific. They are only two of the many burdens that people carry even as they try to build a worthy and enduring house for their new democracy. Half the export earnings, $2 billion out of $4 billion, which was all they could earn in the restrictive markets of the world, went to pay just the interest of the debt whose benefit the people never receive. Cory Aquino was devastated and sad about the situation of the country, about 2 decades of social and political oppression.
Pleasant day, everyone. I am Alfahad Baluan. What I'm going to do here is to show appreciation for the importance of the speech to the grand narrative of Philippine history. The document is relevant to the understanding of the history of our country and our fellow Filipinos. The speech of former President Corazon Aquino gives us insight into how Filipinos struggle to attain freedom, and the insisted resistance from the past has inspired Filipino revolutionaries in our current era. It also clarifies what happened during the time of Ninoy Aquino. Her speech empowered promoting democracy and being a leader to free people. This shows how determined she was to give people rights that were taken away from them in the previous administration. Aquino never ran away from her fight for freedom. Freedom of people to choose and freedom of people to speak for their minds and fight for their rights. The document describes the struggles faced by the Aquinos to help the Philippines achieve freedom. The document also mentioned the debt incurred by the former government before Cory Aquino. This speech also shows how the dictatorship transforms into a democratic government, from its president down to its laws, orders, and rules. The document also mentioned the killing of Ninoy Aquino and the terror from torture and conviction during the martial law. It shows the problem faced by Cory Aquino as soon as she became the president. For instance, poverty and unemployment. The document mentioned two elections that occurred after the death of Ninoy Aquino. His wife participated during the election and lost in the first election. During the second, which is a snap election, she became the president and declares democracy in the country. It is very relevant to understanding how our fellow Filipinos react to the martial law and start a revolution. That Filipinos can be brave and peaceful at the same time, and that these people know their rights and their power. This is relevant in the sense that one great thing is still possible throughout history, that we can do the same when facing the same dilemma and rise against those who own.
If we fought for honor, and if only for honor, we shall pay. So she emphasized that the fight that they started was not wasted, and it was not a nonsense one. So that day, the Filipinos put up a good fight against administration. So in May 1984, new elections for parliament took place, and opposition's parties claimed 53 of 183 available seats. So even though there were large allegations of elections fraud, Corazon had publicly endorsed all of the candidates running for the position of for the opposition parties. So Marcos recently called for a snap or early presidential elections amid shared domestic and U.S. criticism over his handling of a growing communist urgency and a severe economic crisis. So in this case, Corazon Aquino, despite a lack of political experience, said she would consider running against Marcos if 1 million signatures had been collected, urging her to enter the race. So former newspaper publisher, which is Joaquin Roses 72, said his group had collected 882,000 signatures as of 6:35 p.m. Monday in support of her candidacy. So the ultimate result was election of Mrs. Corazon Aquino as a president and Mr. Salvador Laurel as a vice president of the Philippines. And yet, despite all of these serious challenges, not once did Aquino consider declaring martial law. So her stubborn adherence to the democratic process, Archibald MacLeish had said that the democracy must be defended by arms when it is attacked by arms, and by the truth when it is attacked by lies. So is the more not able when one recalls that even as she was fighting off military rebels, so she was also dealing with a fractious cabinet, long-standing domestic rebellions, and pernicious problems like a bankrupt economy, corruption, and also poverty. So that shambles left behind by the Marcos regime.
The speech was impassioned, deeply personal and effective, interrupted 11 times by applauses and bookended with standing ovations. House Speaker Tip O'Neill called it the finest speech I've ever heard in my 34 years in Congress. Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole told her, "Cory, you hit a home run." And the House Minority Whip Trent Lott said, "Let's just say the emotion of the moment saved the day." It would go down in the annals of our history as one of the former president's finest speech. This was the comments and reactions that Cory Aquino received. Her speech played an important role to the grand narrative of Philippine history because it truly shows how Filipinos would do anything to gain freedom. In her speech before the U.S. Congress, Cory shared her experiences and sorrows for losing a loving husband and a good father to her family. She provided a brief narration of how Marcos suspended the Philippine Constitution and shut down the Congress, which eventually led to Ninoy's exile and death, highlighting the cruelty he has experienced in the hands of the military and the dictator. From this, she detailed how the task to free the Filipinos and fight for the democracy fell into her shoulders. She mentioned how she personally experienced the corruption of the Commission on the elections and praised the unity and courage of the people in times of oppression. As the new president of the country, she went over some of her plans to restore the government, first by reinstituting and amending the Philippine Constitution, as well as to start reintegration programs for the healing of the different localities in the country.
Contribution and relevance of the document in understanding the grand narrative of Philippine history. The speech of the former President Corazon Aquino gives us the insights on how Filipinos struggled to attain freedom and between the insisted resistance from the past have inspired Filipino revolutionaries in our current era. It also gives clarification about what really happened during the time of Ninoy Aquino. The document described the struggles faced by the Aquinos to help Philippines achieve freedom. The document also mentioned about the debt incurred by the former government before Cory Aquino. This speech also shows how the dictatorship transforms into the democratic government, from its president down to its laws, orders, and rules. The document also mentioned the killing of Ninoy Aquino and the terror form torture and conviction during the martial law. It shows the problem faced by Cory Aquino as soon as she became the president, for instance, the poverty and unemployment. The document mentioned two elections secured after the death of Ninoy Aquino. His wife participated during the election, lost in the election. During the second, which is snap election, she became president and declares democracy in the country.
For the evaluation of the relevance of the speech to the present time, the speech of the former President Corazon Aquino gives us the insights of how Filipinos struggled to attain freedom and between the insisted resistance from the past had inspired Filipinos revolutionaries in our current era. It also gives clarification about what really happened during the time of Ninoy Aquino. So the struggling Philippines, despite its despair and political unrest, will surely prosper, for all the sacrifices are rendered not for the selfishness but for the common good. The Filipinos saved many lives for driving Marcos away, and Cory Aquino oath to restore what was being lost, the Filipinos' dignity, by strengthening the Bill of Rights, which is evident and present up until this day.
So Aquino lodged an appeal for help. Addressing the House, she delivered a historic speech that managed to sway in her favor the vote for an emergency $200 million aid appropriation. In the moving speech, penned by her speechwriter and our current ambassador to the United Nations, Teddy Locsin Jr., Aquino defended her reconciliatory stand on the communist insurgency, a sensitive issue in the U.S., given that this was 1986 and asked for financial and towards rebuilding the Philippine economy.